know that probably 0 people will give a fuck about what I'm about to talk about, but I posted on my Facebook wall the idea that, because I've seen Marc Maron get a shit ton of flack online for his comedy special, and as somebody who, I'm not, I'll probably be a perpetual comedian, open micer for the rest of my life. I'm not anybody special. I don't really think I know opinions are like assholes. But I was thinking about this because as somebody who started comedy about 12 years ago, yes, I've done comedy for about 12 years, on and off. So put that jab in wherever you need to. I put those jabs into my own brain every fucking day. But I was thinking about Joe Rogan. There's like a strong camp of Joe Rogan people and Marc Maron people. And say what you want to say is both of those guys created a genre. And I think it's interesting because I do see spirituality in everything. I think those two are actually spiritually connected in a weird way. WTF podcast and the Joe Rogan podcast are literally what taught a whole generation of comedians about comedy. So like where those podcasts evolved to, I know that WTF is no longer a podcast, but they created a whole cycle, a whole new bracket of comedians today. And I think when I see the flack about Marc Maron's new special and Joe Rogan's comedy, I think about like the history of comedy. So I might not be like the greatest comedian ever, or like the person with the followers, or the algorithm or whatever, but I have listened to enough comedy over the years and know enough about the history that built those two comedians. And I just want to say that like Joe Rogan and Marc Maron both come from the camp of Bostonian comedians, which have that style of rant comedy. So like that's Maron, but that's also Rogan. Like Rogan is just a hyped up, like he's on his feet, he's athletic, he's like really putting his body into his comedy. He's more of a physical comic, and Marc Maron's more of like a beatnik, old school, like you'd see him in a poetry coffee shop in Boston or New York or Seattle back in the day. But I do want to say, like, they were created by another generation of comics, which was from Bill fucking Hicks. Bill motherfucking Hicks. And I am an old lady at this point, but Bill motherfucking Hicks was the shit. And he created somebody named George Carlin. Like, George Carlin was this comedian who was obsessed with words. And those who are listening that like know this, but like each generation forgets about the storytellers and the communicators before them, because we're in real culture, REEL culture. We're in, flash in the pan culture. We're look at this big gelatinous booty clapping culture. But there was a guy and his name was Belich, and he fucking was a fucking genius, and he, I think during this time he'd be talking about Palestine a lot, and that's what comedians were. That's what comedians were supposed to be. And now it's about the pretty people, the shiny pretty people. That's who you're seeing. I'm not a shiny pretty person. Yeah, I have an OnlyFans. Yeah, I work at the Bunny Ranch. But those are all decisions I made to heal some shit inside of me. Because y'all, I'm not a shiny pretty. Look at this. This is me on a hike. I'm a regular, now middle-aged woman who eats gluten. but still remembers the history of comedy. And Bill Hicks, before Hicks, there was Richard Pryor, who, if you watch the style of somebody like Marc Maron, he's actually a lot like Richard Pryor. Fight me on it, but understand, Richard Pryor was a storyteller. He was telling the truth, and towards the end of his life, he was actually just trying to get out a message, because he had multiple sclerosis, or he had Parkinson's, or that's where my memory fucks up, but he had something that prevented him from being in his physical power. Then, you want to talk about the history of comedy, Moms Mabley, go even further back, there's Moms Mabley, you have Lenny Bruce, lots of different comics that help other generations of comedians become the comedians they are. So at the end of the day, this fight online talking about how Maron's special is such and such, sometimes look at Carlin's later specials. I'm not comparing Marc Maron to George Carlin, but at a certain point you have to look at comedy as like an official way to keep the story going, to keep the flame burning, and we've kind of forgot about that in society, is keeping the flame going. And I have much respect to somebody like Maron, but getting back to the original argument, I think Marc Maron and Joe Rogan are a very similar comedian. I think they are both, I've heard Rogan put jabs out towards Marc Maron on his podcast, saying he's a weird guy, and you hear old school podcasts where they're kind of going back and forth, and there's no, Maron's career really was about his vulnerability. Like, he never stepped back from him being real about his vulnerability. He never stepped back about him being honest about his pain. I think he has his special is thinky, has a special thinky pain. So it's like, this was his career. Is he being true to himself? I think so. But I want to get back to the fact that they're both kind of the same similar type of comic at the end of the day, Rogan and Maron. And I think if you really dissect their comedy side by side, don't go on the fact that Rogan is loud. He's coming up through his body. He's taking the stage. He's moving across the stage. He's using his body as his joke because he's a MMA guy. And Maron's more bringing the energy towards him, into him. But look at the rage, because both of them are coming at it at harnessed rage, which I'm going to go back even further because they came through Boston. You have Louis C.K., say what you want to say. We're talking about styles of comedy. Louis C.K. harnessed rage. Thoughtful rage, harnessed rage. There's a guy named Lenny Clark, harnessed rage. Rich Voss, rage. That's a Jersey guy. But they all come from and I'm talking about male comics right now, but they all raised each other, right? And comedy is a lineage sport. So it's like they're the forefathers of other voices. And people today might be like, oh, shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. It creates another generation of comics, So, for example, Joe Rogan uses the stage, uses his body. Who else did that? Bill Hicks stalked the stage. He used the stage as almost like a catwalk. His whole body was in it. Then he would take us into a rage. He would almost take us into the full rage. That's what Rogan does. His voice will go up into high registers of rage. He'll yell, but he's got a fucking point. Same with Marc Maron. Just different ways they use their rage. Same sort of comedy. I'll stand and die on this hill. Have a great day.